The last thing my son did before driving away wasn't yelling. It was worse than that. He smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a cruel one either. Just a tired, dismissive curve of the mouth like I was a problem he'd finally solved. "You'll manage," he said, setting my old suitcase on the porch. "There's a roof, 4 walls, and you don't really go anywhere anymore." The truck door slammed. Gravel cracked under spinning tires. I stood there, 72 years old, holding a house key that didn't even fit the lock. 3 nights later, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating on the table. Once, twice, again. By morning, I counted 47 missed calls, and one voicemail I didn't listen to right away. When I finally did, his voice wasn't confident anymore. "Dad, please, you need to call me back. Something's wrong. I think you've done something and I don't understand it." I set the phone face down. For the first time in my life, I let my son wait. I used to believe a man's worth was measured by how long he kept going. I'd gone a long time. 46 years as a millwright in Ohio. Night shifts, double shifts, weekends I barely remember. I fixed machines no one else could, in factories that smelled like oil and burnt metal. When my hands finally started shaking, I retired quietly. No party, no plaque. My wife, Elaine, passed 2 winters later. Cancer doesn't announce itself politely. It just arrives and takes everything that matters. After that, my son Mark started calling more often. At first, it sounded like concern. "Dad, you shouldn't be alone. Dad, sell the old place. It's too much for you. Dad, let me handle things." I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So when he said he'd found me somewhere peaceful, I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I let him drive. That's how I ended up standing on the porch of a decaying house surrounded by trees that blocked the sun by noon. No neighbors. No cell signal unless I stood near the window. No plan. Just silence and the quiet understanding that something in my life had shifted, and I hadn't been told the rules. The first night taught me something important. Not about fear, but about clarity. When the sun dropped behind the trees, the cold came fast. The house had no insulation worth mentioning. Wind slipped through the walls like it belonged there. I sat on the edge of a mattress that smelled faintly of mildew and old time, listening to branches scrape the siding. That's when I realized Mark hadn't forgotten anything. There was no food, no working heater, no landline. He'd brought my suitcase inside, set it down carefully, even nodded once before leaving. That nod wasn't guilt. It was finality. I slept in my jacket, one hand wrapped around Elaine's old wedding ring, the other near my phone, useless, without signal, unless I pressed it against the front window. In the morning I explored. The cabinets were empty. The sink coughed rust-colored water before stopping altogether. In the back room I found an old breaker box with handwritten labels faded beyond reading. Whoever lived here before me hadn't left in a hurry. They'd just given up. By noon, hunger sharpened my thoughts. I walked the perimeter of the property slowly, careful with my knees. That's when I noticed something strange behind the house, past a line of brush no one had cleared in years. A sound. Soft. Repetitive. Not wind, not animals. Water. I didn't follow it yet. Some discoveries change things, and I wasn't ready to change anything. Not until I understood why my son would ever think leaving me here was acceptable. By the third day, my son still hadn't called. That silence hurt more than the cold. I rationed what little energy I had, moving slowly, deliberately. Years in factories taught me that panic wastes strength. I tore apart an old door frame to patch a window, used a bent nail and a rock to secure it. My hands remembered what to do, even when my mind drifted. Around noon, I finally followed the sound I'd been avoiding. Behind the house, past the brush, the ground dipped slightly. Ferns grew thicker there, greener than anything else on the property. And right at the center of it, a narrow stream of water pushed up from between two stones, steady and clear. I knelt, touched it, felt the cold bite my skin. It wasn't runoff. It didn't slow. It didn't stop. A spring. I sat back on my heels, heart beating faster than it had in days. In my working life, water meant pressure, steam, cooling systems, production lines shutting down if flow wasn't constant. And this was constant. I filled an old jar and carried it inside, boiling it on a rusted camp stove I'd found in the shed. When I drank it, the taste was clean, almost sweet. That night, as darkness settled in again, my phone buzzed. Once, Then again, Mark's name lit up the screen for the first time since he left me here. I didn't answer. I stared at the phone, then at the jar of water on the table. For the first time, I wondered if my son had made a mistake far bigger than abandoning me. The calls didn't stop after that. They multiplied. Sometimes the phone would ring once and go quiet. Other times it would buzz twice, 3 times, then stop as if Mark was arguing with himself on the other end. I kept the phone face down. Instead, I worked. The spring became my priority. I cleared brush with an old hatchet from the shed, widened the channel with careful hands. The flow never changed. Morning or night, cold or warm, it kept coming. Reliable. Honest. Unlike people. By the end of the week, I'd rigged a crude system, plastic containers, gravity, a slow trickle into the house. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. For the first time since arriving, I washed my face properly. I shaved. When you clean yourself, you start thinking differently. I walked the dirt road the next morning and reached a small town. Barely a town, really. A post office. A diner. A hardware store that smelled like dust and coffee. The woman behind the counter at the diner looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You staying at the Holloway place?" she asked. I nodded. Her expression changed. Not pity. Concern. "That land's been empty a long time," she said quietly. "People said nothing ever worked there." I smiled. Just a little. People say a lot of things. That afternoon, when I returned to the house, my phone vibrated again. This time there was a voicemail. "Dad," Mark said, breathless. "You need to call me. Now. Someone asked me about water rights, about your property." I sat down slowly. So that was it. He hadn't called because he missed me. He'd called because something he didn't understand had finally reached him. I didn't return the call. Instead, I walked back into town the next morning. The hardware store owner, Tom, recognized me right away. He had the hands of someone who fixed things for a living and the posture of someone who'd learned patience the hard way. "You're the man at the Holloway place," he said, not accusing, just stating fact. "I am," I replied. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "County survey truck was out near there last year, checking groundwater flow. Didn't think anyone lived on that land." My chest tightened, but I kept my face still. "What does that mean?" I asked. Tom studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Means someone's been watching that area longer than you think." That afternoon, I met Ruth at the post office. She was in her late 60s, sharp-eyed, with a way of listening that made you careful with your words. When she found out where I was staying, she didn't gasp or shake her head. She just said, "That land's been argued over for years. Old maps show an aquifer line running straight through it." That night, I finally listened to Mark's voicemail. "Dad, please," he said. "I messed up. I didn't know what that land was. If I'd known—" He stopped himself. That pause told me everything. If he'd known, he wouldn't have abandoned me. If he'd known, he would have stayed kind. I sat at the small table, hands wrapped around a warm mug of spring water, and understood something clearly for the first time. My son hadn't misjudged the land. He'd misjudged me. And now, the land was starting to speak for both of us. 2 days later, a white pickup truck rolled slowly down the dirt road. It didn't belong to Mark. The seal on the door read, "County Water Resources." Faded but official. A man stepped out first, mid-40s, clipboard tucked under his arm. A woman followed, boots already muddy, eyes scanning the land instead of the house. "Mr. Hale?" the man called. I nodded. "My name's David Kerr. This is Linda Moreno. We're here to verify a reported groundwater source." So the watching had turned into knocking. I led them behind the house without a word. Linda crouched immediately by the spring, her fingers brushing the water, her attention absolute. She timed the flow, measured temperature, took notes faster than I could follow. "This isn't runoff," she said finally, standing. "This is a clean, pressurized spring. Strong one." David looked up at me. "How long has it been flowing like this?" "As long as I've been here," I said. "Day and night. Never changes." They exchanged a look. "Mr. Hale," David said carefully, "do you know who holds the deed to this property?" "My son thinks he does," I answered. "But I've learned not to confuse paperwork with truth." He nodded slowly. "We'll need to check the records. If this spring feeds the aquifer we think it does, there are water rights involved. Significant ones." That night my phone rang again. This time Mark didn't leave a voicemail. He texted, "Dad, please, don't talk to anyone. We need to handle this together." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I set the phone down and went back outside, listening to the water. It had never asked me for permission, and it wasn't about to start now. The next morning I found tire tracks near the edge of the property. Fresh ones. They didn't belong to the county truck. These were wider, heavier, the kind that came from something expensive, something that didn't expect to get stuck. I followed them until they stopped near the tree line, where the ground dipped just enough to hide the spring from the road. Someone had been standing there. The grass was pressed down. A cigarette butt lay half buried in the dirt. I don't smoke. That afternoon, I walked into town again, slower this time. At the diner, conversations softened when I passed. Not unfriendly, just careful. News travels fast in small places, especially when water is involved. Tom slid a coffee across the counter without asking. "You're getting attention," he said quietly. "What kind?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, the kind that comes with offers and pressure. Back at the house, my phone buzzed twice in quick succession. A voicemail, then a text. "Dad, you need to listen to me. People are asking questions you don't understand." I listened to the voicemail this time. Mark's voice was tight, controlled, afraid. "They know about the spring, about the aquifer. You can't say anything official without me. Legally, it's complicated." I laughed once. Short, dry, complicated. He'd never said that word when he left me here with no heat and no food. As the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch and watched the trees darken, listening to the steady sound of water moving beneath the ground. For the first time, I understood something Mark didn't. Whatever was coming next wasn't about money. It was about who had the right to speak and who had already given theirs away. The letter arrived before Mark did. It was tucked into my mailbox, plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a single page, professionally typed, folded with care. Notice of intent to assess water rights. I read it twice, then a third time slower. They weren't threatening, not yet. They were preparing, asking me to confirm ownership, usage, access, asking questions that sounded polite but carried weight. That afternoon a second truck came, black this time, clean, no county seal. A man stepped out wearing boots that had never touched mud and a jacket too light for the weather. He smiled like someone who practiced smiling in mirrors. "Mr. Hale," he said, offering his hand. "Name's Aaron Pike. I represent parties interested in regional water development." I didn't shake his hand. "I'm not selling anything," I said. He didn't seem surprised. "Of course not. Not today. I just wanted to make sure you understood what you're sitting on." "I understand enough," I replied. His smile tightened. "Then you also understand that land like this attracts attention. Sometimes difficult attention." That night Mark called again. "This time," I answered. "Dad," he said quickly, relief flooding his voice. "Thank God. Listen to me carefully. You need to stop talking to people. You could ruin everything." "Everything?" I asked. "Yes, everything." I looked at the cracked ceiling above me, listened to the water outside. "You already decided what everything was," I said quietly, "and it didn't include me." He went silent. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of that silence. I was ready for what came after it. Mark showed up the next morning. I heard his truck before I saw it engine too loud, tires spinning just enough to announce urgency. He stepped out wearing city clothes that didn't belong here, eyes scanning the trees like they might close in on him. "Dad," he said, forcing a smile. "You look okay." "I am," I replied. He didn't like that answer. We sat at the small table inside, the one I'd fixed so it didn't wobble anymore. I poured him water from the spring. He took a sip, then froze. "This is it," he said. "This is the water." "Yes. You have no idea what this is worth," he continued, leaning forward. "Developers, bottlers, this could solve everything. My debts, my business. We just need to move fast." I watched his hands as he talked. They shook slightly. Not from cold, from fear. "You left me here," I said calmly. "With nothing." He waved it off. "I did what I had to do. You weren't safe with me anymore. I was under pressure." "So was I said. "I just didn't abandon anyone." His jaw tightened. "Dad, don't do this. Legally, this land is still mine," I finished. I checked. That stopped him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the water kept flowing, steady and patient. Finally, Mark stood. "You're making a mistake." I nodded once. "I already made one. I trusted you." He left without another word. As his truck disappeared down the road, my phone buzzed again. Not from Mark. From a number I didn't recognize. Whatever was coming next wouldn't ask politely. The call came just after dusk. A woman's voice this time. Calm. Professional. Mr. Hale, this is Karen Whitfield with the State Water Commission. We've reviewed the preliminary field reports. We'd like to conduct a formal assessment of the spring on your property. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning, if that works for you. It did. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not from fear, but from a strange sense of balance returning. For weeks, everything had felt tilted, like I was waiting for someone else to decide what happened next. Now, the decisions were lining up in front of me, one by one. In the morning, 2 vehicles arrived, one official, one unmistakably not. Mark stood near the second, talking fast into his phone, pacing like a man trying to outrun time itself. When he saw me, he stopped. This is getting out of hand, he said. You should have waited. We could have controlled this. I looked past him to the trees. Control isn't the same as ownership. The officials worked quietly. Measurements, photos, notes. They didn't ask Mark anything. That hurt him more than anger ever could. Finally, Karen approached me. Mr. Hale, we'll need documentation proving ownership. If the spring feeds the aquifer we believe it does, the rights matter. A lot. Mark stepped forward. I have the papers. She glanced at them, then shook her head. These won't hold. The silence that followed was heavy. Mark stared at me, eyes wide, not pleading yet, not angry. Just realizing, for the first time, he understood something was slipping away. And this time, there was nothing he could leave behind to save himself. The paperwork arrived 3 days later. Thick envelope, official seals, language dense enough to intimidate most people into giving up before understanding a single sentence. I didn't. I took it to Ruth at the post office. She read slowly, lips pressed together, then looked up at me with something close to satisfaction. Your son rushed this, she said. These documents transfer management, not ownership, and even that wasn't filed correctly. So the land, I began, is still yours, she finished. Always was. That night, Mark called again. His voice was different now. No control. No strategy. Dad, please, he said. I'm running out of time. They're calling my loans. If this goes public, it already has, I said. Silence. I can fix this, he tried again. I'll move you. Somewhere better. Somewhere warm. I looked around the house, the repaired windows, the solid table, the quiet strength of the place. I'm already where I need to be, I replied. The next morning, Karen returned with a geologist and a surveyor. They confirmed what everyone was beginning to suspect. The spring fed directly into a regional aquifer. A rare one. Karen spoke carefully, but her words carried weight. Mr. Hale, this resource is valuable. There will be interest, pressure. You'll need legal protection. I nodded. I've been under pressure before. Outside, Mark sat in his truck, watching. For the first time, he looked small. And for the first time, I wasn't the one being left behind. The first offer came quietly. No trucks, no suits, just an email forwarded by Karen with a subject line that didn't sound impressive at all. Inquiry regarding resource access. I read it twice. They wanted exclusivity, long-term rights, numbers that made my chest feel tight not from excitement, but from disbelief. Money like that didn't belong to men who slept in jackets a month ago. I didn't answer. Instead, I spent the day fixing Mrs. Keller's porch railing down the road. She paid me with a hot lunch and a jar of apple butter she'd canned herself. When I came back, the house smelled like wood dust and something solid, something earned. That evening, Mark showed up again. This time, he didn't get out of the truck right away. He just sat there, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. I'm out of options, he said when he finally came inside. No greeting, no anger, just truth. You put yourself there, I replied. He swallowed. They'll take everything. I nodded. They already did. You just didn't notice when. He looked around the room, the repaired walls, the tools neatly lined up, the water jug by the door. You're really not leaving, are you? No, I said. I finally arrived. He stood there a moment longer, then left without another word. Later that night, I replied to the email. One sentence. I'm open to discussion on my terms. Outside, the spring kept flowing. Unhurried, unimpressed. Exactly how I wanted to be. The meetings began the following week. Not here, never here. I made that clear. They came to town instead, conference room above the bank, coffee that tasted burnt, chairs designed to make people uncomfortable just long enough to rush decisions. I didn't rush. 3 companies, 2 lawyers, 1 man who talked too much and listened too little. They spoke in polished phrases. Mutual benefit, streamlined access, fair compensation. I asked simple questions. Who controls the flow? What happens in a drought? Who repairs what breaks? Most of them hesitated. One didn't. Her name was Allison Reed. She represented a regional cooperative small towns, shared infrastructure, local hiring. She didn't promise the biggest number. She promised stability. That spring can change lives, she said, but only if it doesn't destroy the place it came from. That mattered to me. When I returned home that evening, Mark was waiting. He looked worse than before. Thinner. Older. I heard you're meeting with them, he said. I am. You could save me, he said quietly. I studied his face, the same one I'd taught to shave, to drive, to stand up straight. You keep saying that like it's my job, I replied. His eyes filled just briefly. You're my father. I nodded. That's why I won't teach you the wrong lesson. I closed the door gently. Outside, the spring kept its rhythm, and inside me, something finally settled. The decision didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces. A conversation with Ruth about her grandson moving away for work. Tom mentioning the hardware store barely breaking even each winter. Mrs. Keller worrying about water pressure every August when the heat lingered too long. I started seeing the spring differently. Not as leverage, not as revenge, but as responsibility. When Allison Reed returned with a revised proposal, I read every line. Slower than she expected. Careful where most people skimmed. Local hiring. Shared profit with the township. Guaranteed residential access no matter what. I signed. The announcement came quietly, the way important things should. No press, no ceremony. Just permits filed and trucks scheduled. Mark heard about it the same way everyone else did. He called that night. You chose them, he said flatly. Yes. They're not paying the most. I know. You could have taken the money and disappeared, he snapped. Why stay here? I looked out the window at the trees, at the dark line of forest, holding the house steady. Because disappearing is what you did, I said, and it nearly destroyed you. His breath caught. Dad, he whispered, I don't know how to fix this. I closed my eyes for a moment. Neither did I replied. That's why I didn't abandon anyone. He didn't answer. Outside, the spring flowed on unchanged by contracts, arguments, or regret. It had chosen its path long before either of us tried to control it. Now, so had I. Construction started at the edge of summer. Not the kind that tears land apart, but the careful kind. Survey flags instead of bulldozers. Crews who walked the ground first, listening more than talking. Allison kept her word. The first people hired were locals. Tom's nephew, Ruth's neighbor, 2 men who'd been driving an hour each way for work and didn't have to anymore. The spring was capped gently, protected, guided, not forced. Watching it happen felt strange, like seeing something private become shared. But it wasn't being taken from me. It was being trusted. Mark came by once during that time. He stayed near his truck, didn't cross the yard. You've turned this into something else, he said. I turned it into what it already was, I replied. He rubbed his face. They're foreclosing on the house. The business is gone. I nodded. I know. You could help, he said. Not accusing, just tired. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, I already did, just not the way you wanted. He frowned. What does that mean? You'll have work, I said. If you want it. With them. Starting over. No shortcuts. His shoulders sagged, like something heavy finally slid off. You wouldn't be my boss, he said quietly. No, I answered. You'd be accountable. He didn't smile, but he didn't argue either. As he drove away, I realized something. This wasn't forgiveness. It was something harder. It was letting consequences do their job, while still leaving the door unlocked. Mark started work 2 weeks later. Not as a manager, not as a decision maker, as a labouré. Hard hat, early mornings, mud on his boots by noon. I didn't watch him the first day. I didn't need to. Allison told me later he asked more questions than anyone else on the crew and complained the least. That surprised her. It didn't surprise me. Failure has a way of sanding the edges off pride. One afternoon, Karen from the commission stopped by to finalize compliance paperwork. She stood on the porch, listening to the water run through its new channel. "You handled this better than most people would," she said. "Most see numbers. You saw people." "I saw myself," I replied. She nodded, then paused. "You know this will keep growing. Attention, requests, pressure." "I know," I said, "but I also know when to stop." That evening, Mark came by on foot. He looked exhausted. Honest. "I fixed a valve wrong today," he admitted. "Cost them time." "And?" I asked. "And I owned it. Stayed late. Learned." I poured him water. He drank it slowly. "I used to think control meant strength," he said. "Now I think it just meant fear." I didn't correct him. Some realizations need to land on their own. As he left, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. For the first time, those shadows didn't feel like abandonment. They felt like proof. Proof that even late in life, things can still take shape, if you're willing to let them. The first royalty payment arrived without ceremony. No phone call, no congratulations. Just a direct deposit and a confirmation email printed neatly by Ruth at the post office. I stared at the number longer than I expected to. Not because it was large, though it was, but because it didn't feel like relief the way I'd imagined money would. It felt quiet, settled, like a bill finally paid after years of carrying it in your pocket. I walked home instead of driving. Along the way, people waved. Not because of the spring or the project, but because I'd fixed their steps, their doors, their fences. The water brought opportunity. The work built trust. That afternoon, Mark stopped by again. He looked different now. Thinner, yes, but steadier. Like someone whose spine had learned a new shape. "They offered me a longer contract," he said. "Full-time." "That's good," I replied. He hesitated. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." I nodded once. We stood there in the late light, neither of us reaching for words we weren't ready to earn. "Dad," he said finally, "I know I can't undo what I did." "I know," I said, "but I'm trying to become someone who wouldn't do it again." I looked at him, then really looked. "That's all any of us get," I said. "One next step." As he walked away, the spring murmured steadily behind us. Not forgiving, not forgetting, just continuing. And sometimes that's the most honest kind of grace there is. The call came late at night. I knew it wasn't Mark before I even picked up. "Mr. Hale," a man said, voice smooth, practiced. "This is Victor Lang. I represent a private investment group. We believe you've made a sentimental decision regarding your water rights." I said nothing. "There are revised numbers," he continued. "Numbers that could change your retirement entirely." "I'm retired," I replied. A pause, then a small laugh. "Everyone has a price." I looked out the window at the dark trees, at the faint reflection of the house behind me, solid now, whole. "No," I said. "Everyone has a limit." His tone cooled. "You should think carefully. Deals like yours don't stay protected forever." "I've lived 72 years," I answered. "I know the difference between a warning and a threat." He hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, Karen confirmed what I already felt pressure was coming from outside the county now. Bigger players, less patience. "You're not wrong," she said. "But you're not alone either." That afternoon, the town council met. Not officially, just people sitting together, talking through what mattered. Water access, jobs, stability. Mark stood near the back, quiet, listening. When the meeting ended, he caught up to me outside. "They tried calling me too," he admitted. "Wanted me to talk you into changing your mind." "And?" I asked. He shook his head. "I told them no." That word "no" used to terrify him. Now it steadied him. As we walked home under the fading sky, I realized something important. The 47 missed calls weren't about money. They were about losing control. And control, once gone, rarely comes back quietly. Mark came to the house just before sunset. No truck this time. He walked the last stretch of the road, boots dusty, shoulders squared like someone bracing for weather. He didn't knock. He waited. I opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, the room was quiet, the good kind. The kind earned over time. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he said. "I came to say something." I nodded. "I was wrong," he continued. "Not just about the land. About you. About what mattered." He swallowed. "When I left you here, I told myself it was practical, that you'd manage. that it wasn't cruelty, just necessity. I listened, but every day since, he said, I've learned how expensive that lie was. He reached into his jacket and set a folded paper on the table. A resignation letter from the position he'd tried to climb back into years ago. I'm staying with the crew, he said. Learning. Starting from the bottom. If that's all I ever do, I'll accept it. I studied the paper, then pushed it back to him. You don't need my permission, I said. He nodded. I know. I just needed you to know I won't run again. Outside, the light shifted gold, thinning to blue. I won't forget what you did, I said gently. But I won't let it be the only thing between us. He breathed out, slow and unsteady. That's more than I deserve, he said. Deserve has nothing to do with it, I replied. Choice does. When he left, the house felt lighter, not healed, but honest. And honesty, I've learned, is where real rebuilding begins. 6 months later, the house no longer creaks when the wind comes through the trees. The roof holds. The floors are steady. The workshop smells like cut pine and coffee in the mornings. I spend my days fixing what needs fixing, not just wood and hinges, but small things people bring with them when they know you'll listen. A loose step, a stubborn door, a long story that needs somewhere safe to land. The spring still flows the same way it always has. Quiet, constant, uninterested in who owns what. The cooperative pays fairly. The town has jobs again. Kids don't move away as fast. On some evenings, neighbors sit on my porch, cups in their hands, talking about ordinary things that feel important when you don't rush them. Mark comes by once or twice a week. Never unannounced. Never empty-handed. Sometimes we talk about work. Sometimes about nothing at all. We don't pretend the past didn't happen. We just don't live inside it anymore. People ask me if I regret not taking the biggest offer, if I regret not leaving, not cutting ties, not disappearing when I finally could. I tell them no, because the greatest change didn't come from the money. It came from standing still long enough to see my own worth clearly. If you're listening to this and feel abandoned, pushed aside, forgotten, remember this. Sometimes being left behind is how you discover what was never meant to leave you. And sometimes the call you don't answer changes everything.